In the 13th century, the nobility of Ireland had started to suffer from the constant fighting with the Anglo-Irish. As the accounts state, the Gaelic Irish had transformed by the end of the 12th century, and in such, by the 13th century, the Irish had copied from the Anglo-Irish somewhat identical heavy Norman cavalry design of the 12th century. Accounts state of how the 13th century Irish knights rode into battle dressed in light armor, and rode light mounts, in which, instead of charging into the ranks of the enemy, the Irish knights would act more identical to that of mounted skirmishers, attacking the flanks of the enemy by throwing javelins into their opponents, and would as well charge into the ranks of the enemy with long lances, which were copied from the Anglo-Irish. Accounts tell of Irish knights of the 13th century taking part in crusades, either to the lands of Iberia or to the Holy Land. One such knight by the name of Anthony MacMahon would go on crusade in the lands of Iberia in the year of 1243. Historical accounts tell of a force of 500 crusaders would make their way to the Iberian Peninsula to fight the Muslim Moors. Written accounts describe MacMahon fighting in battle with his host of around 30 men. Written records describe MacMahon would charge headlong into the ranks of the Moors before being shot with a volley of arrows. In the year of 1245, MacMahon would die from his wounds that he had sustained in another battle, while other knights like Aaron O'Connor, who would later become known as O'Connor the Kinslayer, accounts state of how he would slay his brothers and cousins while fighting in the war between that of two factions of the O'Connors. Aaron O'Connor would take the side of his eldest brother in his goal to retake their family lands and titles from their uncle and brothers, who kicked them off their lands in 1253. Aaron O'Connor would later become known as the Lord and Keeper of Ulster and Connacht, until his death in 1261, when battling both Anglo-Irish and English in the Battle of Culloden, while another infamous account of an Irish knight, that in which has sadly become forgotten, that of the tale of Desmond O'Rourke, commonly known as the O'Rourke the Lesser, because of him being the youngest of 7 brothers. O'Rourke the Lesser would serve under the O'Neills until the death of his father in the year of 1296, where he would then serve under his eldest brother, Thomas O'Rourke, who would later be known as O'Rourke the Pretender, as accounts tell of Thomas O'Rourke trying to become the High King of Ireland, before being betrayed by his Irish allies and handed over to the Lords of the Pale. Rather than keeping him imprisoned in the city of Dublin, the Anglo-Irish lords would have him drawn and quartered and finally beheaded before parading his head on top of a spear. Hearing of what happened to his brother, Desmond O'Rourke would what can be best described as Game of Thrones his way to avenge his brother, as O'Rourke would invite somewhere between 12 to 13 noblemen along with their families to host them in his family home. And there he had the hands of the noblemen and their families nailed to the tables. And here he would commit an act that would outmatch that of the Red Wedding, as around 20 to 30 people had been executed by his command. This would later give him the name as O'Rourke the Avenger, as O'Rourke would continue to fight against that of the Anglo-Irish and the Gaelic lords into the 14th century, and would support the crowning of Edward Bruce as the High King of Ireland in the year of 1316. However, while fighting the Battle of Fuhart in the year of October of 1318, O'Rourke was forced to flee from the field of battle after 3 of his brothers, along with Edward Bruce, fell in battle, while 2 of his brothers would be captured and sent to the Tower of London, who would pass away in 1320 and 1321. With Edward Bruce slain in battle, O'Rourke and his last remaining brother would flee to the lands of Scotland and France, hoping to return with an army to retake their lands, but no record tells of such aid ever given. These are only a few accounts of Irish knights in history, as in later centuries, the Knights of Ireland would be commonly known and seen through the field of battle. The clothing of the 13th century Irish knights was a mix of bright colors and designs, as accounts state of Irish knights would wear short trousers along with an undertunic. Some of these tunics would reach as far down as to the knees. In such, though, many Irish knights preferred the tunics to reach only as far down to the mid-thigh, allowing the knight to have more mobility with their legs on the field of battle as they mounted their horses. Leggings were a common form of garment in which would be worn for an everyday life. The leggings would be tied to a string then which was attached to the trousers, and would even be tied below the knee to keep the loose fabric close for a tighter feel.
Amalos rus da chalawet Din din do darem go no Din din do darem go is on En no da gwena du En no da gwena du Adadre dur ya malos rus Din din do darem go Din din do darem go is on
Irish knights would wear a mix of footwear, some in which were copied from the English nobility, but a lot of times the Irish would wear a form of style that would be commonly used in Ireland until the 20th century. Though some Irish knights preferred to fight without any footwear in battle. As we can understand, the Irish countryside is a lot more different compared to most countrysides in Europe. An addition of spurs would start to be worn around the time of the mid-13th century, as they would have been copied from the Anglo-Irish. Most of these were discovered around the region of the Pale and Ulster, which would have been made of brass or iron, and in such would have been made with a single point, as a design that would be common throughout Europe at the time. Unlike male leggings, Irish knights would wear a form of split leg armor. This style of armor was commonly used in the 12th and early 13th century. But by the late 13th century, Irish knights would stop using such armor. For what reason is still unknown, as pictorial evidence shows Irish knights wearing long tunics by this time, so it is hard to tell if they were still wearing such armor or the armor had fallen out of fashion. long tunics would be worn over the under tunic in order to be worn for everyday apparel. In some accounts, Irish knights would show off their wealth with patterns and designs sewn into the fabrics. Closed long-sleeve gamisons would be worn to protect the knight in the field of battle. It is believed that padded armor had been introduced into Ireland sometime after the late 10th century to early 11th century. This armor alone could actually stop the cut of a sword, but blunt impact weapons such as an axe or even a mace could break the body underneath said armor.
Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich, Waineranich, Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich denan. Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich, Waineranich, Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich denan. Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich, Waineranich, Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich denan. Kulanto mein Brianto mein Kulanto mein Vojoch, Kulanto mein Brianto mein Hülelana monar. Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich, Waineranich, Hamiskis milum him, Waineranich.
Shirts of mail would be worn to provide an extra form of protection for the user. At this point in time, Irish knights would have worn mail shirts with mail sleeves reaching only as far down to the elbows, while reaching as far down to protect the knees and thighs. However, some accounts tell of Irish knights wearing long shirts of mail that would reach as far down to the ankles. However, if this was true or not is still left unknown. Around this time, mail coifs would still be attached to the shirts of mail. However, there are other accounts of aventail being attached to both the shirt and a helmet. But in such around the early to mid 13th century, the mail coif would start to be separated from the shirt of mail. Other times, mail-headed protection wouldn't be added, as accounts state of how Irish knights would prefer no addition of mail headwear, possibly because the cost or weight of the additional mail. In such, though, it was up to the user. Woven belts would be worn in order to identify friend from foe on the field of battle, as these would have been commonly worn throughout up to the 19th and 20th century, as a way to tell where a man was from. In such, they would actually show the colorations of the coat of arms. Instead of full-sleeve mail armor, Irish knights would wear a form of split plate armor on the forearm. These would be used to provide protection from cutting blows to the exposed sword arm in the middle of battle, and would continue to be used up into the 16th century. The swords that were used by the Irish were, majority of times, copied from that of the late Norman style swords, along with that of Norse Gael swords, as the pommel of these swords would be a mix of round, oval, and Brazil nut pommels. It is highly believed that these swords were copied from the Anglo-Irish in the previous late 12th century. It is only somewhat by the late 14th century that we start to get the accounts of Irish ring swords. In the early half of the 13th century, the Irish would start to wear a mix of nasal, skull cap, and even bowl helmets, as accounts even state of users wearing nasal helms with an addition of cheek guards, and even at times back neck guards. These helmets would help protect the user from downward cutting blows, and as well even impact blows. These style of helmets would be worn up into the 14th century, while by the late 13th century, the Irish would start to wear a bowl and skull cap, and even central peak helmets more commonly. Many of these helmets would have an addition of male aventail depending on the user. Accounts of long daggers or skin would start to be used on the field of battle as a backup or joint combat weapon. These would be of a single-edged blade with a blade length of around 12 to 14 inches. The way in which the dagger was used was to be drawn by the user's shield arm, in which would hide the blade behind the shield. This would allow the user to fight with more than one weapon. This accounts describe of Irish warriors using the dagger to catch and lock an opponent's blade when they would strike the shield, or as well to strike the opponent with the blade when both opponents were pressed up against each other in battle. Clubs would be used as a secondary weapon if a knight would not use an axe, as accounts describe Irish knights using blunt impact weapons fashioned from wood to break an opponent underneath his armor. Axes that were used by Irish knights maintaining as a backup weapon if they had actually lost their spear. Most of these axes were said to have been designed of that of a light-handed fighting weapon, meaning the axe would have been mostly of that of a small-headed design to allow quick but heavy blows. The shields that were used were commonly of that of a strapped-on design, and in such it would be identical to that of the Scottish charge, which were either made of that of a wicker and hide design or of an overlapping sheets of wood and leather. There are accounts of buckler shields being used as well, as it was common in a style of fighting in such of the shield for both defense and offense, making the knight more faster on the field of battle. But in such, it did highly depend on the user. Heater shields were very uncommon to have been seen and used by the Gaelic Irish. However, accounts tell of Irish knights from the most noble of houses would have used a heater shield over the charge design. For reasons is left unknown. Javelins were highly used by the Irish knights all the way into the 16th century, as unlike other medieval knights of the time, that in which used heavy mounted cavalry charges, the Irish would throw javelins into their opponent's ranks in order to open it or break the enemy, as a wave of Irish infantry would follow soon after the javelins had been thrown. Irish knights would carry with them somewhere between 6 to 10 javelins into battle. By the mid-13th century, the lance started to be highly used by the Irish knights. It's believed the Irish would have copied this from the Anglo-Irish, especially with the style of warfare. But by the mid-14th century, the Irish would start to abandon the lance for the javelin, possibly because the style of heavy cavalry warfare was ineffective in Ireland. How would you dress as an Irish knight? Let me know down in the comments below. If you have any ideas on future videos, also please let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more to help the channel grow, and as well, stay tuned for more Irish medieval history. Anyways guys, been Celtic Templar. Hope to see you in the next one.